Good morning, Maddie. How you doing, bud? And there goes my eustachian tube. It's rainy and cold today. After 3 years, I am finally experiencing cold. It's probably 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Feels cold. So I've put on my Pahom shirt. These are from the north, from Chiang Rai, and they're 100% cotton, and they're fairly heavy, and the closest thing to cold weather gear that I own at this point in my life. They're wonderful shirts. They last forever, and they've got 2 great pockets, one for your wallet, one for your phone. I don't wear a belt anymore, so keeping my pants up when I have both the wallet and phone in my pants pockets is they get droopy. So these shirts with their 2 pockets at the waist, they're really useful. All right, we continue with She Kept the Bar Between Them. Bop-a-da-bop. We're almost at the end. I think we can finish today, particularly because I'm not going to read this first story. It's called Author, and I have dramatized it on the channel in the Boontongs playlist. So I am not going to read it. The next one is called a Clit-Mat carol, and I don't remember if I've read this before on the channel, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. It's a Christmas story. I think I read it on the channel at Christmas. I've done 4 productions of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens on stage as a prop master, and on 2 productions I actually got on stage and acted. I played Mr. Fezziwig, who is the moral compass of the story, plays a very crucial role in the story, in that he gives Scrooge an example of how to celebrate Christmas when Scrooge is a young man, and Scrooge ignores it and becomes a miser and a curmudgeon instead. See, if he had been, he came out of a poor background, he was in a workshop as a boy, he was beaten, he lost his sister to fever, he had a really shitty childhood, and if he had gone from that to being a curmudgeon and a miser, and then these 3 ghosts show up to torture him, we'd go, wait a minute, he's sympathetic. Why are you torturing him? He doesn't deserve this. But because Fezziwig, his boss, when he's a teenager, gives him an example, shows him how to live right, and Scrooge chooses to ignore that and become a miser. He makes a conscious decision to be the way he is. Therefore, we can celebrate those ghosts torturing him. He's a bad guy. He deserves this. So Fezziwig's a very important character. He also gives you something fun at the end of the first act, which is a very dark act, and it gets even darker in the second act. So he's a little bit of levity, a little bit of brightness to finish the first act so that the audience comes back after intermission. I very much enjoyed playing Fezziwig. I also, in another production, played the Ghost of Christmas Present, simply because I had the deepest laugh of any male actors available. Ho, 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 ho. Yeah. But anyway, I really like a redemption story, and I like this redemption story, A Christmas Carol. So I took that idea of a miser and I put him on Phuket and made him an old expat on Phuket. A Clit-Mat carol. Abe Schrute grabbed the waiter by the elbow and pulled him back to the table. "Where the hell's my green onion?" he growled at the teenager. "The fried rice comes with green onion. Where's the green onion?" The waiter stared back and tried to smile, but it was only half-hearted. He couldn't understand a word that Abe was saying, but it appeared that the old Farang had counted the grains of rice on his plate and found them lacking. The waiter didn't know much English, but he knew that a Farang who had the money to come to Phuket should be able to afford something other than fried rice and a bottle of water, especially on the night that they called Clit-Mat. Abe tired of waiting for a response. Balls, horseshit. If you're gonna work in a restaurant, you gotta learn English. The boy twisted his arm away and scampered off in fright. Damn kids, pay 80 baht for a plate of fried rice and no damn onion. Onion's the best part. Every time you turn around in this country, someone's trying to pick your pocket. He ladled generous amounts of the chilies and fish sauce, provided free in little caddies in the center of the table, onto his rice, and he began to eat. Abe hunched over the table, his skinny left arm wrapped around his plate, as if he was afraid someone would try to steal his food. He shoveled the rice into his mouth and washed it down with gulps of water. When he was finished, he picked his teeth with his fork and washed his fingers in his drinking glass, then counted 100 baht in coins out of a plastic bottle he wore on a string around his neck, and he left them there on the table. The young waiter was seated by the door, watching the TV hung over the cashier's station. It's an old story. As Abe approached him, the young man stood up and delivered a little bow and his best Meli Clit-Mat. But as Abe passed, a few grains of rice sticking to the gray stubble on his chin, he shouted at the boy, "Balls, horseshit!" He stepped just outside the door and looked suspiciously up and down the street. The sidewalk was crowded with tourists, stumbling from bar to bar, haggling with t-shirt vendors, waving down tuk-tuks. Abe plotted a path down the block toward the beach road, a path that would expose him to the least risk of contact with other people. He began to weave his way toward the beach, just as wary of the passing knots of laughing tourists as he was of the buckled pavement. He had gone no more than 10 paces when he noticed a European couple handing out money to a gaggle of excited children selling flower garlands. The tourists were both fat and sunburned, and only an enormous purse distinguished the female from the male. The children were chattering and giggling and hanging garland after garland around the necks of the foreigners, who appeared to be just as giddy as the children. As Abe passed, he pulled the sleeve of the spherical male half of the couple and said, "You know, those kids are all controlled by gangsters. That money's just going to go buy dope for some speed freak." The man looked at Abe with shock. "What does it matter?" he said. "Look at these kids. Look how happy they are. I buy all their garlands and they get to go home early. Maybe get some sleep tonight. It's Christmas. What's wrong with you?" Abe spat, "Balls, horseshit," at the tourist, and he stalked on down the street. He turned left at the beach road and started south down the dark promenade. Most of the tuk-tuks that passed didn't bother to offer him a ride. The local drivers recognized him by his hunched shoulders and his knobby knees. They knew he'd rather walk than pay for a lift. A new driver slowed down and offered a shy, You, where you go?" But Eb shouted, "Balls, horseshit." The shocked driver sped off, and Abe flipped his middle finger at the back of the receding tuk-tuk. "Damn people think just 'cause you're white, they can be rude. You. What, it's too hard to say excuse me? Screw 'em all." When he came up the driveway to the Chai bungalows, Abe stood for a moment to catch his breath in the shadows outside the open-air, cement-floored space that the management liked to flatter with the name Salalan Chai Seafood Restaurant. The Sala was only a tin roof on some concrete pillars. It had been built originally as a carport. It was halfway up a good-sized hill, across the road, and at least 50 meters from the sea. On this night, the place was made festive with strands of electric fairy lights strung between the joists of the roof, cardboard angels taped to the concrete pillars, and crowds of young budget travelers noisily enjoying themselves. Amid the rented motorcycles scattered across the gravel parking lot, the last dying embers of a charcoal cooking fire, glowed in a huge brazier. Abe could smell the grease that had burned on the coals. "Balls," grumbled Abe from his vantage point on the driveway. He ran a critical eye along the buffet. "Idiots, paying 800 baht for barbecued chicken and canned cranberry sauce," he shouted. "Cranberry sauce is for Thanksgiving, you idiots." But he was certain nobody heard him. He skirted the Sala Lan Chai seafood restaurant, the home of the neighbor. Sala Lan Chai, the home of the neighbor, the home of the nephew. Because in A Christmas Carol, he goes to a Christmas party at his nephew's house. And he made his way to his bungalow, which stood pretty far up the hill, at the end of a brick path from which most of the bricks had sunk out of sight in the mud. It was the bungalow farthest from the restaurant and the road and the sea, and thus the cheapest room in the place. Abe's bungalow was so far removed from the others that it had the appearance of a wounded animal on the edge of the herd, waiting for a lion to leap out of the jungle and end its suffering. It was a slow, painful walk up the hill for Abe, whose knees popped with every step. Even with the exertion of the walk, he didn't break a sweat. Abe's blood was so thin that he never felt the heat. He let himself into his room, turned on the light, and immediately looked around to make sure that nothing was missing. While Abe had a small fortune in a Cayman Islands bank, what few material possessions he owned were present in the bungalow. His travel clock on the bedside table, his carry-on bag in a corner, his toiletries kit next to the sink. One of his t-shirts was hanging in the closet, one hung on the drying rack in the bathroom, and one was on his back. As he checked his wallet and his passport, which were hidden under a corner of the carpet under his bed, Abe noticed an envelope on the floor, which had evidently been pushed under the door while he was at dinner. It was an airmail envelope from home, and the postmark showed that it had followed Abe from Bangkok to Chiang Mai, Koh Samui, and Krabi before finally finding him on Phuket. The return address on the envelope was that of a law firm in Des Moines, Iowa. When he saw that, Abe laughed out loud. "Ha ha ha! You guys never give up, do you?" he said to the envelope, and throwing himself onto his bed, he ran a bony finger under the envelope's flap. I like this. It's like one of those wavy arm guys outside a gas station. I like it. It may be distracting. I don't know. I don't think you actually watch these, do you? I think you just listen. This letter was almost identical to the previous dozen or so that Abe had received in the 2 years since he left the United States. The firm of Kaplan, Seidman, and Pigeon were informing Mr. Schrute that in his absence, the court had found in favor of Mrs. Bell Jacob and awarded her 1/2 of the proceeds of the sale of the Happy Bones Dog Toy Company, once owned in partnership by Mr. Schrute and the late Mr. Jacob. Mr. Schrute was ordered hereby and forthwith to return said monies to Mrs. Jacob, along with interest and penalties, or be in contempt of court and liable to a jail term of not less than 3 years, etc., 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 etc. Balls! Abe wadded up the letter and threw it across the room, missing the wastebasket by more than 3 feet. He was about to treat the envelope the same way when he noticed that there was another piece of paper inside. He drew it out cautiously and between 2 fingers as if it might bite him. The paper was small, a pale pink in color, torn from a notepad of a style that a certain kind of Midwestern woman keeps next to the phone in her kitchen. It's a very old story. In the upper left corner of the page was a cartoon of a cat watching butterflies through a window. The handwriting was in violet ink. He read the note with a scowl. Abe, this missive said, if you are doing this because you're still angry with me for choosing Marty Jacob over you all those years ago, please stop it. You know that my marriage was unhappy, and Marty paid me back 100 times for any pain I might have caused you. I'm not asking for the money for myself. I'm doing all right with the dog grooming salon. But Tim, Tiny Tim, wants to go to medical school, and he'll never be able to afford it without the money from Marty's company. And it was Marty's company too, as much as yours. Say what you will about Marty Jacob. He was always a good man of business. I'm only asking you to do the right thing. Love, Belle. Abe smashed the pink paper in his fist and threw it across the room. This time he missed the wastebasket by 5 feet. Horse shit, he said to the walls. Breaks my heart 50 years ago. Now she wants me to pay for little Timmy to go to school. Marty was never a good man of business. He was up to his neck in debt when he died. Carrying that debt around is what killed him. She knows that. She had to sell their damned house to pay his debts. Screw her. He paced around the room for a minute. He picked up the letter and reread it. Then he tore it into pieces and flushed the pieces down the toilet. A few pieces of pink paper remained in the bowl, and Abe flushed again. He decided to take a shower. The shower head was hung on the wall at a height equal to Abe's sternum. And at this elevation up the hill, the water came out in a tepid dribble. Abe lathered his body with soap and rinsed off, mumbling curses all the while. He was so preoccupied that he lathered his body a second time before he realized what he was doing. He rinsed off in a rush and pulled on his ratty shorts and the t-shirt from the closet. I gotta have a drink, he said to the empty room. Reaching under the bed, he lifted the corner of the moldy carpet and pulled out his wallet. He carefully selected 2 red notes from the wallet and just as carefully replaced the wallet under the carpet, under the bed. Then he went down to the restaurant. The Sala Lanchai, in the Sala Lanchai, the noise of Slavic Christmas carols was blaring out of cracked speakers. Gangs of grubby European 20-somethings in carefully groomed dreadlocks milled around the tables, drinking Mekong soda and tripping over chairs. A dog was under a table, chewing on an expensive running shoe he'd found outside the front door of somebody's bungalow. Abe crept round the edge of the crowd until he came to the cashier. Give me a bottle of Sang Tip, a bag of ice, and a bottle of Sprite, he said to her. The girl was wrapping the bottle of whiskey in newspaper, and Abe was holding out his money to her, but the bills were immediately swept aside by a fat, brown hand, dimpled at the knuckles. "Don't you worry, Mr. Abe," said a voice at Abe's elbow. Abe looked down into the doll-like face of Papa Boone, the proprietor of the Chai bungalows, who on this night was dressed in a red felt jacket trimmed in white cotton wool, which was too small across the shoulders and left his chest exposed. On his head was a red felt hat that had stood straight up like a traffic cone. Abe found his eyes drawn to the blue two-tailed lizard tattoo that sprawled across Papa Boone's chest and peeked out between the splayed collars of the threadbare red coat. "You very good customer. You VIP. Papa give you from Clit-Mat." The jolly old man reached over the counter and pulled a Snickers bar out of the candy display and dropped it into the bag with the whiskey, ice, and soda pop. "Merry Clit-Mat, Mr. Abe," he said. Abe tried to protest, saying that he wanted no favors, but Papa Boone was abruptly dragged away by a gang of happy Swedes for drinks at their table. Abe stood at the cashier's counter for a moment, looking somewhat wistfully at the party, and then he took his bag up to his room. As he trudged up the hill, he noticed that there were no lights on in any of the other bungalows. Around his lighted window, there was nothing but dark jungle all the way to the top of the hill, where a pale full moon was made hazy by the humidity. He was the only person at the tidy bungalows not at the party. As he set out a glass and put the ice into a bowl, Abe listened to the sounds coming up from the restaurant. Somebody was singing "Oh Holy Night" in French. He put the candy bar beside the glass and pulled out the Sprite and whiskey. The cashier had wrapped his bottles in pages from the previous week's Phuket Gazette. And as Abe slowly unwound the stiff paper, his mind still on the music floating up from the restaurant, a picture caught his eye. It was a photo of a Farang man of advanced years and nondescript features. For some reason, the face looked familiar to Abe, and he read the caption to see if it was someone he might have known on the island. Mr. Cecil Fowler, aged 64, was found dead in his condominium at Phang Sok Wila on 10 December. The medical examiner at Wachira Hospital determined the cause of death to be an overdose of pain medication and listed the death as a suicide. Because Mr. Fowler left no will, and because of the advanced state of decomposition of the body, the Australian Embassy has ordered that the remains be cremated. There will be no memorial service. Abe had never met Mr. Fowler, but as he looked again at what was obviously a reproduction of Mr. Fowler's passport photo, he knew why the face was so familiar. Mr. Fowler looked a lot like Abe. His legs felt weak, and he sat down heavily. He made himself a stiff drink and tore the wrapper off the Snickers bar. Its chocolate was coated with a gray crust of decomposition. Abe put it down without taking a bite. From his seat at the desk under the window, he could see down the hill to the restaurant and past it to the empty beach road, and beyond that to the sea. Moonlight was reflected in the perfectly flat seawater, stretching all the way out to the horizon. The Milky Way climbed up from the horizon and arched over the tidy bungalows. A single yacht rode at anchor in the bay. Twinkling lights were strung in a dotted chevron from the stern up to the tip of the mast and then down to the prow. These lights were reflected in the water under the boat in a shimmering V. The lights looked to Ebb like a pair of blinking arrows, one pointing up, one pointing down. The Sala Lanchai was an oasis of light and sound in a dark, silent landscape. Very old story. No silent landscapes on Phuket anymore. Under its corrugated metal roof, the crowd of tourists was a jumble of color and movement in the dim glow of the fairy lights. No single individual was distinguishable. Abe thought about Mr. Fowler rotting in the tropical heat on the floor of his condo. His absence from his usual haunts must have gone unnoticed by his neighbors. The body probably wasn't found until the rent was overdue. Abe wondered what could have happened to the man that made him take his own life. As Abe finished his drink, Bob Marley's Santa Claus is Coming to Town floated up the hill. He took the pages of the Gazette off the desk, folded them, and then folded them again and again. When he had a stiff lump of paper, he twisted in his chair and threw it backhand at the trash can. It dropped into the basket without touching the rim. Abe mixed his second drink. He was suddenly hungry again. He hadn't had cranberry sauce since he was a boy. What if it was turkey? He said aloud. A great big turkey, or a goose, not chicken at all. He thought he would definitely go down and join the party. He didn't think about the price at all. But first, he thought, he'd write a letter. He pulled some paper and a pen out of the desk drawer. The paper had Tidy Bungalows, Phuket, Thailand, printed on it, and it had been in the drawer so long that the corners were yellow and curled. I don't think they have note paper and envelopes and pencils and pens in hotel drawers anymore. Very old story. He looked out the window down the hill, and as his little clock on the bedside table beeped 12 times to greet Christmas Day, Abe wrote, Dear Belle, sorry it's taken me so long to get back to you, but I've been traveling around Thailand and the mail's not too good here. The end. So, Abe is Ebenezer. Tiny Tim is little Timmy who wants to go to school, needs the money. Belle was the name of his girlfriend when he was a teenage boy. When Ebenezer Scrooge was a teenager, he had a girlfriend named Belle. And she left him because he was too interested in money. How's it go? The Ghost of Christmas Past is Father Boone dressed up like Santa Claus, showing him, as Fezziwig did, how to celebrate Christmas. The Christmas Present. He's the Ghost of Christmas Present. The letter from Belle in Iowa is the Ghost of Christmas Past, reminding him of his past when he was partners with Mr. Jacob, who was always a good man of business, who was weighted down by his debts, Jacob Marley. And the Ghost of Christmas Future, which is the spirit of death and a tombstone in the book, is the obituary in the newspaper of a man who looks just like Ebb. And it has the effect, and that is, I think I did not meet the challenge. That is the challenge of this story, and it's the challenge of the book and the play. Ebenezer Scrooge has to make a hard right turn when he sees that gravestone. Up until that point, he is defiant. He has not changed his mind despite the previous two ghosts. He has not changed his mind despite the ghost of Christmas future showing him other deaths. He only changes his mind and he is redeemed when he contemplates his own death. He sees his name on that tombstone and boom, he's got to make that right hard turn. Next scene, he's at the window. Boy, is that big goose still in the butcher's window. Get it and take it to Bob Cratchit. I am changed, I am redeemed. So he's got to make that hard right-hand turn. It takes a very good actor who is usually a 70-year-old man, and it's at the end of a 2-hour play, and he's got to suddenly turn it up to 11 and make that turn and become the redeemed soul that we all crave to be in ourselves. And if he does it, if he manages that hard right-hand turn, the play works, and the audience will come back next year. And your community theater can do a Christmas Carol every year as a cash cow, and people will come back year after year after year, even though we all know the ending of the story, right? So that's the challenge in writing this story, to make Abe have a change of heart when he sees that obit. And I don't think I pull it off terribly well in this. I try to even like poke at it. The boat, the ship on the water, which I think is a neat image, and it's something I did see. They've strung Christmas lights, whoever's living on this yacht, from the back to the top of the mast and down. So it's a pyramid on the water that's reflected in the still water with a down pointing arrow. So it's like, you going up or you going down, dude? These are your choices. You've got like elevator buttons in a black, empty, waiting for Godot existentialist landscape, an empty landscape. The only sign of humanity is a Christmas party, and you got a choice, dude. You're gonna go up, you're gonna go down. You're going to heaven, you're going to hell. You're gonna be redeemed, you're gonna stay a rotten bastard. So I try to like really heavy-handedly point at the decision he's making, but I still don't think I pulled it off. The next story is Fishballs, which very definitely is on the channel, on the Boontongs playlist. So I'm not going to read it. It's one of my favorite stories I've ever written. It is under the headline, What Do Thai Bar Girls Really Think About Phalang? All right, the Night Stalker. We got time for this. So I don't know if you ever knew of Bernard Trink. Bernard Trink is a historic figure in newspaper publishing. As far as I know, the only newspaper columnist who got an entire page every week, and at the beginning of his career twice a week on Friday and Sunday, an entire page in a major metropolitan newspaper for 30 years to say anything he wanted. And his contract spelled it out. He could say anything. They couldn't even correct his spelling. The editors could not touch his page. And all he did was pimp for Patpong Road. Sometimes he'd go to Pattaya, sometimes he'd go to Cowboy, but since the owners of the Bangkok Post own Patpong Road and were collecting rents from all the whorehouses on Patpong Road, they were very happy to let him continue to pimp for the bars and brothels on Patpong Road in the newspaper of record in this kingdom for 30 years. That's never happened. No newspaper has ever given a columnist an entire page every week for 30 years, certainly not to pimp. And long after other newspapers were throwing rocks at the Bangkok Post publicly for doing this, they kept him in the paper because, again, they were making way more money off of the brothels than they were making out of a newspaper. So they were happy to have their newspapers simply advertise the bars on Patpong Road. And it's sad, it's very sad. The Bangkok Post in every other respect was a very credible newspaper and the newspaper of record in this kingdom. And at any rate, Trink did that. And I always thought, my God, I was bored with the bar scene after a couple of years and still had to go out to look for stories for my column. How boring it must have been for Trink. 30 years doing the same job, 30 years going down to these dingy, stinky, sticky floored bars And he hated the bar girls. Oh my God, he hated them. He absolutely hated them. And would go out of his way to call them names and deride them. And he believed that AIDS was a hoax, all the COVID hoax stuff. He did all that with AIDS. He told the world, you don't need to wear well, not that far, but he said, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's no AIDS on Patpong Road. There's no AIDS in Thailand. The whole thing's a big scam. And he was not a very nice person. But I was fascinated by the guy. And there were people saying to me, Steve, he's old, he's going to retire. When he does, for sure, the Bangkok Post will ask you to take over that page. But I left in 97 and he continued doing that page till they finally kicked him out. I think they sold the paper and the new owner said, yeah, no, we're not doing this anymore. But it was way, way, way in the mid 2000s. So I would not have been tapped. It was not worth staying in Thailand on the promise that I would replace Bernard Trink in the Bangkok Post. And I like the Nation anyway. I like being in the Nation every week. So this is the Night Stalker. And it's me imagining the life of Bernard Trink. Oh man, this is killing me. I hate this, Maddie. Oh, screw it. Rundle Falk, I like that name, Rundle Falk, ran his eyes down the length of Tony's bar looking for an empty stool. He always chose a stool at random, hoping to see something new from a new position in the room. It was hard to pick a stool that he wasn't already familiar with. There were very few stools in the bars of Bangkok that Rundle Falk had never occupied, and he hadn't seen anything new in ages, but he had hope. Watching what went on in the bars and writing about what he saw was how Rundle made his living. His column, The Night Stalker, had appeared every Saturday in the Bangkok Penny Saver for 30 years. His column filled an entire page, something almost unheard of in any newspaper in the world. I think it is unheard of. His contract stated that he had absolute freedom to write anything he pleased without intrusion by the editors. That was something else almost unheard of in print journalism. Each week, Rundle exploited this unique opportunity by filling most of his page with the press releases that came to him via fax. Very old story. Most of these press releases concerned upcoming special events at the better hotels, but the readers who knew his work skipped those and sought out the glimpses of the seedy side of the city that slipped into the column in disjointed paragraphs between the press releases. Yeah, most of his page, he would just transcribe press releases. There's a new Filipino band in the lobby at the Oriental, check them out. Yeah, just that. That's what, there's a new English breakfast special at the Irish pub. Check it out. But what people read him for was a van load of girls fresh from the Northeast has just arrived at the King's Group Bar on Patpong Road. Check him out. He was a pimp, flat out, plain and simple, just a pimp. Couldn't write his way out of a wet paper bag. Absolutely terrible writer, absolutely terrible. He was just a regular nebbish from New York City who fell into the dream job. He was paid to go out to the bars, Maddie. For 30 years, he was paid to go hang out in the bars. What we pay to do, he was paid to do. His regular readers counted on Rundle to tell them which bars had just welcomed a minivan of inexperienced girls from the Northeast, which bars had paid the police to be allowed to stay open an extra hour, and which ones offered live sex shows without a cover charge. Expatriate bachelors in the city clipped his recommendations and put them on the refrigerators. They planned their weekends around Rundle's recommendations. The tourists who discovered his column believed that they had found a guide to the secret, hidden parts of the famous Bangkok nightlife, and that other tourists never saw. a glimpse behind the veil at the real lives of bar girls and touts. Rundle's popularity, at least measured by readership, was enormous, and it came despite the fact that most of the information he offered could be had by asking the doorman at any hotel. Market surveys showed that even those who hated the idea of what Rundle did still read the Night Stalker every week. Those who hated him most followed his column most closely. Rundle was about as successful as a newspaper columnist can be. He had held his office longer than any politician in the city. He was still making money in the bars long after the bar girls he met his first year on the beat had retired. Rundle settled himself more comfortably on the bar stool. He looked around the room, checked his eustachian tube, saw the usual half-drunk men carousing with half-drunk women. A thin man in a bright blue Hawaiian shirt walked unsteadily into the bar. He approached a woman, whispered something in her ear, and got a rude brush off. Nothing new there. Rundle swept the fingertips of his right hand over the bar to check for stickiness. He placed a stack of postcards and a pen on a clean spot. He had learned early that if you write in a notebook in a tavern, you make people nervous. But if you scribble on postcards, you look like any other tourist. Now, people just carry their phones into go-go bars, I guess. And that makes people nervous, I suppose. But nobody's writing notes anymore. People, YouTube is all impromptu, off the cuff, ad lib. These guys just walk down Walking Street and blather into their phones. There's no editors, there's no gatekeepers, there's no education in writing, there's no experience in writing for an audience, there's no work that goes into it. And it's terrible. And they're still giving advice. These guys step off the plane their first week in the kingdom, they're giving advice. This is what you should pay for a freelancer on the street outside Nana Hotel. Yeah, the whole, as much as I disliked what he was doing, he was still a step above what people are doing now. In fact, Rundle resembled a tourist in many ways. His clothes always looked as if he'd been sleeping in them. He was pale, overweight, and he complained a lot about the heat and the mosquitoes. What set him apart from most of the type of tourist who hangs out in Bangkok bars was that Rundle did not enjoy the company of prostitutes. He found them untrustworthy, pushy, and loud. He did. He hated them. Just hated them. A pair of them was being too loud for Rundle's taste right now, berating a Western man who was seated on a padded bench against the wall of Tony's bar. Clad only in pristine white panties, they were standing in front of the man, shouting and waving their arms around. The man's face showed a mixture of indignation at being chastised by trollops and fascination with their breasts, which were bare at his eye level, only a foot from his face, and bouncing around as the two women shook their fists at him. Rundle had seen 100 performances of this little play. It had an energetic second act, but it lacked in the third. The man would soon offer both women money to calm them down. They would all end up great friends as long as his money lasted. It was nothing new, nothing that would ever make good copy, and so it was just an annoyance. While the two near-naked women raged at the seated man, they were the focus of attention for everybody in the room, and so nothing else of interest would happen until they had hushed. Rundle considered leaving and going to the next bar, but it was unlikely that this early in the evening anything more interesting would be happening anywhere else. Besides, the bartender had just placed a chilled glass of free orange juice in front of Rundle, And it was still damned hot outside. That's something he and I had in common. Neither of us drinks. He's dead now. Neither of us drank. So, and we both were offered free drinks to pimp bars, me on Phuket, him in Pat Pong. And we both just had orange juice. On a Thursday night, I could drink 5 or 6 orange juices and smoke a pack of cigarettes in about 3 hours in the bars. And he didn't smoke cigarettes, but he drank an awful lot of orange juice. Rundle pulled at his shirt to get some air against his chest and made bored put, 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 put noises with his lips. The thin man in the bright blue Hawaiian shirt was leaning weakly against the bar. He asked the woman next to him something, and he was told to go away. Sometimes Rundle's job was excruciating in its boredom. Bangkok were either most of the bars at Bangkok were either tiny windowless rooms or giant jukeboxes full of endlessly repeating strobe lights where the same songs played over and over and over. Christ, the Macarena. If I never hear the Macarena again, it'll be too soon. That and Achy Breaky Heart. For some reason, those two songs in the 90s, over and over and over and over and over. That and Kukam by Tongchai McIntyre. The big bars were just as claustrophobic as the small ones in Rundle's mind. If there was nothing going on in a Bangkok bar, it was like being trapped in an elevator. The eyes and the mind had nowhere to wander. Fighting the boredom of his job was a major occupation for Rundle. He was bored right now. He yearned for something new to happen. He sipped at his orange juice, but found that the bartender had put sugar syrup in it. Well, this bartender was new, apparently. That was something, at least. He didn't know Rundle's tastes. It was new, not really new. It had happened perhaps 1,000 times over 30 years. The last time anything really new happened in a Bangkok bar was when the city outlawed smoking in bars and restaurants. Those were some heady weeks for Rundle. The new law literally changed the atmosphere of an entire industry. Everybody in the bars was cranky and foul-tempered and unpredictable for weeks, and Rundle was in heaven. Before that, the last really new thing to happen was the almost overnight introduction of the cell phone into bar girl society. It was enormous fun for Rundle to watch thousands of women who almost never wore pants try to figure out how to carry a tool designed to fit in a pocket. I think that's a later ad. I think when I was preparing this for publication, I added a paragraph about cell phones. But it had been years since the smoking prohibition, and Rundle was bored. He was famous, powerful, and bored. The men, Thai or Farang, who owned the bars, knew that Rundle's column could bring in the crowds or keep the crowds away. And in the early days, he'd been threatened a few times with violence or even death. True. But eventually, those same people had learned that properly manipulated, Rundle's column was extremely useful. So Rundle had influence with all the bar owners and even with the police, who often had a need to communicate with the foreign community through unofficial channels. This made Rundle the object of respect and even fear in the bars of Bangkok. If Rundle had been at all attracted to bar girls, he could have enjoyed a lot of free sex. But Rundle was happily married, true, a doting father, and he was only in the bars to make money. He had that in common with the women who worked in the bars, who were also bored with their jobs. Like them, he slept in the daytime and ate his breakfast at sundown. Like them, he came home after work smelling of stale beer and dried sweat, half deaf from over-amplified music, disgusted with the behavior of tourists and vaguely ashamed of his profession. Rundle often had more in common with the women he wrote about than he had in common with the people who read what he wrote. The two women who had been screaming obscenities at the Western man 10 minutes ago were now cuddled up in his lap, their arms around his neck. The women were kissing each other passionately, much to the man's apparent delight. Rundle yawned. The other women and customers had gone back to their drinking and dancing. The thin man in the blue shirt approached another woman, asked his question, and was sent away. He left the bar with slumped shoulders, stumbling a little bit on his way out the door. Rundle looked around for something new, or at least something interesting to note down on a postcard. The problem was that he'd been in countless similar bars on countless similar nights. He'd written about anything that could happen in such a place, written about it a dozen times or more. Rundle was like the oil pressure gauge in an expensive automobile, a sensor device attached to an extremely well-designed and efficient machine, one streamlined by half a century of constant operation, its foundation tested by 6 centuries of concubine culture. It was a machine beautiful in its simplicity and economy, but it was a machine that did only one fairly mundane thing: move men's money into women's purses, and then move a portion of that money into the wallet of the man who owned the bar. A man falls from his stool in a drunken stupor. A naked woman slips on beer and skins her knee. A woman brings a man she's known for only 5 minutes to orgasm with her hands under a table. But at closing time, the only important, solid, measurable, definite thing that has happened is that money has been moved from A to B to C. The machine ran 24 hours a day and never missed a stroke. And Rundle Falk was the little $2 plastic and chrome meter on the back of the machine that read a constant, steady value year after year after year. In the beginning of his career, the tiny variations in the workings of the machine had held some interest for Rundle. He'd enjoyed learning about the gears and the cogs and the push bars inside the machine, the court battles over ownership that could leave a bar without a legal owner for years at a time, with the profits disappearing monthly into some limbo of lawyers' and policemen's pockets. The friendships made and broken in the back office and in the ladies' room. The way the women picked their customers, but always convinced the customers it was him making a choice. The way the women danced differently on the days leading up to and the days after their periods. The way they aged so rapidly in the bars. The way they called all men darling because they couldn't remember all those names. The ways they laughed. The ways they cried, the ways they prayed. But now it was all just routine. It was all dull and drab. He sat on his stool in Tony's bar and let his eyes wander around the room, praying for something new to happen. And we've got 5 more pages. All right. On Fridays, that put it in both ears. On Fridays, Rundle wrote his column. Sundays and Mondays, he didn't work. Tuesdays, he began his week's research at Nana Plaza and Pat Pong. Wednesdays, he covered Soy 33 in Washington Square, and on Thursdays, he went to Soy Cowboy. This was a Thursday, so he was on Soy Cowboy, where he began, as always, with noodle soup and fried rice at the old Dutch restaurant before proceeding on his rounds. He always tried to finish his tour about an hour after closing time. After so many years, Rundle never even needed to check his watch. He could tell how close he was to closing time by the action in the bars and outside on the pavements. Early in the evening, the girls were taking their time, being picky. But as closing time approached, they grabbed up whatever tourist was left on the street. After the bars closed, the streets filled with men and women making instant, ill-advised connections. Whenever Rundle saw a transvestite dragging a man almost unconscious with drink into a taxi, he felt joy. It was time to go home. After leaving Tony's bar, Rundle made his way down the street. He had no pattern for choosing which bars he entered. He knew them all, and he knew that the same old things would be happening everywhere. He would drift, going back and forth across the street, letting his whims choose his venues, always hopeful he'd see something new, but never believing that he would. He was as likely to enter a bar because the bar next door had a baby elephant outside as he was for any other reason. Rundle hated elephants. They never did anything new. The girls who worked the doors, who shouted suggestive invitations to the tourists, the hello girls, never shouted anything at Rundle. They never called him Saxy Man or asked him, "Where you go?" They all knew him. When bars in Bangkok changed hands, Rundle's schedule was passed from the old owner to the new with the lease. If an owner had something he wanted to advertise or a bone to pick, he'd tell his most experienced door girl to keep an eye out for Rundle on whatever night of the week Rundle was in the neighborhood. A few times every night, a woman would sidle up to him and give him her best polite why, saying, "Mr. Bob, or Mr. Hans, or Mr. Abdul, or Mr. Chen, say, can you come talk him now, please?" Rundle would amble inside the bar, or if it was going to be a long discussion, they'd sit outside, and the owner would make a pitch, or a plea, or simply pass on some gossip he hoped would damage a competitor's business. Rundle no longer carried any flicker of hope that the man would have anything new to share. Rundle meandered his way from bar to bar down the length of Soy Cowboy. He made note of a bar for sale, nothing new, but it was worth a mention toward the top of the page. Several times he saw the thin man in the blue shirt approach a woman, whisper something in her ear, and be dismissed with laughter or insults or both. He saw a drunken tourist whose bad manners earned him a beating. Nothing new there. Still, if Rundle needed filler, a warning about bar etiquette was always useful. Learning that there were actually rules of behavior in bars was something that surprised a lot of tourists. Finding out about the rules fit into the behind-the-scenes promise implied in the Night Stalker brand. Also finding out that three little guys high on speed can easily kick one big drunk's ass was a revelation to a lot of readers. All around him, Rundle saw men made stupid by lust and liquor. It was everywhere he looked, like wallpaper. Young men, old men, rich men, poor men, tinker, tailor, Indian chief. A man goes through his life pursuing women and meeting resistance every step of the way. Remove the resistance suddenly, and a man is likely to lose his balance and fall down. Up and down the street, in the bars, in the VIP rooms, on the street, in the taxis, men spending all their money in a rush, then borrowing more and spending that just as fast. Men shouting too loud because they were scared, shouting too loud because they were angry, shouting too loud because they thought they had found happiness. Best friends traveled to Thailand together and left as bitter enemies. Men who came from different nations and different occupations and different religions met in a bar, shared an adventure, and became brothers, only to separate a week later at the airport and never meet again. Sometimes Rundle wanted to shout a warning at all these men. Look out! You're gonna hurt yourself. But they never would believe him if he did. Still, doing it would be something new, so he thought about it. Halfway through his night's work, Rundle sat down on a plastic chair on the sidewalk in front of After School A Go-Go. Somebody put a cold glass of orange juice, unsweetened, on the table in front of him and sidled away. Rundle took a sip and grudgingly approved. The thin man in the blue shirt passed by, caught a woman by an elbow, but before he could speak, she shouted, "No, you ask already. Go away." Rundle leaned back and looked up at the thin slice of night sky visible between the buildings. "When I started this job," he said aloud, though nobody was listening, "you could still see stars up there." In the early hours of the morning, Rundle dropped into a plastic chair outside the Midnight Bar. He was across the street from Tony's bar. He'd been down the street and back, into and out of Moonshine Joint and Spice Girls, Long Gun and Rawhide. He'd wandered through Five Star, Deja Vu, Dollhouse, Sheba Shark, and Baccarat. He'd visited a few vendors in the street stalls and joked around with a 5-year-old girl selling jasmine garlands. He'd spent 5 precious hours of his life on Soy Cowboy, talked with a dozen people, and had 6 glasses of orange juice. He placed his postcards on the plastic table and looked over his notes. And now I'm quoting from his notes. Knit, oh, God. I don't know if I'm going to get through it. Oh, it's really uncomfortable. Whew. Relax. Knit at our place wants her regulars to know she's back from the Northeast and wants to see all of her old darlings. Pet at Fanny's wants her regulars to know her sister is here from the Northeast and they're working together as a team, but just for special darlings. Gail at Cactus Bar wants Canadian Jim to know she is going to the Northeast for a couple of weeks, but she's left his clothes and passport in the keeping of he know who. There were a handful of other notes in similar vein. Absolutely nothing new. All stuff that he'd written many times in more than 1,500 columns. Rundle felt as if he was carrying a great weight on his shoulders. He ached to see something new. Instead, he saw the thin man in the bright blue Hawaiian shirt stumble down the street. Either the man was very drunk or exhausted nearly to the point of collapse. It's really raining hard now. I hope you can hear me. At the end of the block, a trio of obvious transvestites were engaged in hilarious conversation, with much arm waving and flipping back of their long, shiny hair. Rundle knew just what was going to happen, and it gave him a small, pleasurable feeling, because when one of the transvestites hustled the drunken man in the blue Hawaiian shirt into a taxi, it would mean that it was time for Rundle to go home. He watched as the man approached the corner. Rundle clicked his pen closed and put it in his shirt pocket. The transvestites noticed the man in the blue shirt and stopped their conversation. Rundle gathered up his postcards into a neat pile. The thin man in the blue shirt staggered up to the 3 faux women, and the tallest one threw her arm over his shoulder. With her free hand, she began to stroke his chest. Rundle stood and hitched up his pants. He had taken one step away from his plastic chair when he froze in his tracks. I'm going to stop I'm going to stop and finish this when the rain stops. All right, we continue. So Rundle is watching this man in the blue Hawaiian shirt approach these three transvestites. And one of them has put her arm over the man's shoulder. Rundle watched as the man approached the corner. Oh, I've read this part. Rundle stood and hitched up his pants. He had taken one step away from his chair when he froze in his tracks. The man in the blue shirt had asked the tall transvestite something, and she had barked with laughter. She stood back from the man and stared at him in amazement. Rundle heard the man say, "Please, I haven't eaten in days." And then something happened that amazed Rundle. It made him stop breathing for a moment. The tall transvestite opened her purse and handed the man in the bright blue Hawaiian shirt a 50 baht note. The man took it and put his hands together at his forehead. He bowed his head and said, "Thank you. Oh God, thank you so much." The three transvestites giggled their way around the corner and disappeared. The man in the blue shirt stumbled to the nearest street vendor and ordered food. "Well, I'll be damned," Rundle sighed. "That's something new." With a look of utter happiness on his face, he sat back down and took out his pen. And thus ends She Kept the Bar Between Them. 3 books down, Maddie. 2 to go. It is Wednesday morning. I leave Sunday night. It's actually like 10 minutes into Monday morning. My plane will fly out. But I will go to the airport on Phuket on Sunday night. And then a couple days in transit, roughly, about 30 some hours. And I will spend 2 weeks in Iowa with my mother and with Amy and my son and his wife and my cousins and 60,000 students at the University of Iowa. I don't think these 2 books that we've got left, Bangkok Buckaroo and Leaving Thailand, I'm not going to get to those before Sunday night, I don't think. I don't even have them printed out. So I don't know. Maybe I'll read these from Iowa. That would be a trip. They were written in Iowa. Well, Bangkok Buckaroo was written in New Mexico. Anyway, Maddie, you have a great day. We'll see what happens. The rain is slowing down. Chamdan may show up to work today. Bye, bud.